The morning Mamie Callahan boarded the westbound train in St. Louis with nothing but a carpet bag, a bruised collarbone hidden beneath her high-necked dress, and $23 folded inside her shoe. She did not look back at the platform even once. It was the spring of 1882, and the Missouri Pacific Line ran long and straight into the open country, as if the earth itself were exhaling, spreading wide its brown and gold chest to let the sky do what it wished. Mamie pressed her forehead to the cool window glass and watched the city dissolve behind her, the brick facades and the gaslit streets and the church steeple where she had stood in a white dress 3 years ago, and said words she had believed with her whole heart, until the whole heart had learned better. His name had been Douglas Callahan, and she had kept his name the way a woman keeps a scar, not because she wanted it but because it was already part of her, already written into every document she owned. Douglas had never raised his hand to her. She wanted to be clear about that, even in her own mind, because the world was full of women who had suffered worse and she did not want to be dramatic. Douglas had never struck her. He had done something subtler and in some ways more thorough. He had taken her opinions and put them gently aside. He had taken her laughter and let it go quiet for lack of encouragement. He had taken her love of painting, the small watercolors she made of the river and the market women and the shadows on brick walls, and suggested, with great patience and politeness, that perhaps it was a frivolous use of their afternoon light. He had made her feel like a window that had been slowly painted over from the outside, still in the frame, still technically a window, but no longer letting anything through. She had woken one morning in February, Douglas already gone to his offices downtown, and she had sat at the kitchen table with her cup of tea and realized she could not remember the last time she had felt anything at all. Not sadness, not anger, not even the dull comfort of routine. She had felt like a woman-shaped absence. And that was the morning she understood that the quiet in their house was not peace. It was suffocation wearing the clothes of respectability. She had spent 6 weeks planning. She had told no one. Her sister Vera would have counseled patience. Her mother would have wept and then quoted scripture. Her friend Cecile would have nodded in sympathy and then told her husband over supper. Mamie had gone to the post office herself, had answered an advertisement in the St. Louis Dispatch about a position as a seamstress and laundress for a hotel in the town of Colby Creek, New Mexico Territory, a place she had to locate on a map at the library, a smudge of ink at the edge of the known world. The hotel proprietor, a woman named Mrs. Hattie Foss, had written back in 3 weeks with an offer of $9 a month, a private room above the kitchen, and meals included. Mamie had written yes. She had packed her bag while Douglas was at his club on a Thursday evening. She had taken only what was hers before the marriage, her grandmother's thimble, her watercolor paints, a book of Keats she had owned since she was 16. And she had taken the $23 she had saved from household money over 6 weeks, skimming $1 or $2 at a time from the marketing budget with the methodical care of a woman who had learned to be invisible and had decided to use it for the first time in her favor. The train ride was 2 days and a night, with a change of cars in Albuquerque and a bone-rattling stage ride the final 40 miles into Colby Creek. Mamie ate a cheese sandwich she had brought from home and read her Keats until the light failed, and then she sat in the dark of the car and breathed slowly and steadily, and felt something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it: relief. Colby Creek was not a beautiful town. It was a practical town, built against a low mesa with the ambitions of commerce and the aesthetics of urgency. The main street was wide enough for 2 wagons to pass and unpaved, which in spring meant mud the color of red clay. There were 2 saloons, a dry goods store, a livery, a barber shop, a post office the size of a large closet, a small school, and the Colby Creek Hotel, which was a 2-story adobe building with a long covered porch and a sign painted in fading green letters. Beyond the town, the land opened into something enormous and raw and deeply, achingly beautiful. red rock formations rising from the earth like the ruins of a civilization no one had ever named, the sage flats stretching silver-green to the horizon, and above it all a sky so blue it seemed to push downward, pressing the whole world into sharp relief. Mamie stood in front of the hotel with her carpet bag and looked at that sky and felt her lungs expand in a way they had not in 3 years. Mrs. Hattie Foss was a broad, dark-eyed woman of about 50 with silver-streaked black hair and the bearing of someone who had made a decision long ago to be unmoved by nonsense. She looked Mamie up and down on the porch of the hotel and said, "You're thinner than I expected from your letter. We'll fix that. You know how to work a needle." "Since I was 8 years old," Mamie said, "and laundry. I have strong hands and no complaints about soap." "Good," Mrs. Foss said and opened the door. "Your room is up the back stairs. Breakfast at 6, supper at 7. The guests are mostly ranch hands passing through and occasionally a cattle buyer from Las Cruces. I expect you to be professional and invisible." "That," Mamie said quietly, following her inside, "I am very good at." She settled into the room above the kitchen, which was small and smelled of cedar and wood smoke, and was the most completely her own space she had occupied in 3 years. She hung her spare dress on the hook behind the door, set her paints on the windowsill, put Keats on the shelf, and placed her grandmother's thimble on the sill beside the paints. And then she sat on the edge of the narrow bed and put her face in her hands and cried, not from grief, she understood, but from the extraordinary sensation of no longer having to hold herself so tightly together. She was 26 years old. She had run from a life that was killing her quietly, and she had landed, somewhat improbably, in the red-rocked edge of New Mexico territory, and she was going to be all right. It was 3 days before she noticed Cornelius Alden. He was not the sort of man who made himself easy to notice. That was, she would come to understand, something essential about him. He was tall but not imposing, lean in the way of men who work outdoors and never think about it, with dark hair that needed cutting and went a little past his collar, and a face that was weathered and calm and held its expressions close, the way a good card player holds his hand. He sat at the corner table in the hotel's small dining room each morning at 7 and ate his eggs without conversation, read whatever newspaper he had managed to acquire, which was generally 3 or 4 days old, and left exactly $1 on the table when he rose. Mamie noticed the dollar first. Most of the ranch hands left nothing or left a few cents. Cornelius Alden left $1 every single morning. She noticed him properly on the 4th day, when she brought his eggs out and the wind had come up through the propped-open window and sent his newspaper pages scattering. He moved quickly to gather them, and when he straightened back up, their eyes met and he said, "I apologize for the mess," in a voice that was low and even and somehow careful, the way a man speaks when he is used to being the quietest person in a room. "No harm done," she said. He nodded once, which was apparently his version of a full sentence, and went back to his eggs. She went back to the kitchen and found herself thinking about the nod. It had been a complete nod, a considered nod, the nod of a man who meant precisely what he nodded and nothing more or less. She asked Mrs. Foss about him that evening. "Cornelius Alden," Mrs. Foss said, rolling out biscuit dough with the authority of someone rolling a verdict. "He has the horse ranch about 6 miles east on the flats below the mesa. Has had it 4 years. Came from somewhere in Colorado, I believe. Keeps to himself, pays his bills, doesn't drink to excess, which puts him in a minority around here. He eats breakfast at the hotel on account of not having anyone to cook for. Wife died 3 years ago." Mamie set down the bowl she was drying. "What happened to her?" "Fever," Mrs. Foss said. "Quick. He took it very hard and has been taking it very quietly ever since. He raises quarter horses, very fine animals, I'm told, though I don't pretend to know much about horses, and he sells them to ranches up and down the territory. Honest man, good reputation." She glanced sideways at Mamie. "Why the interest?" "I'm just learning the names of the regular guests," Mamie said, which was mostly true. But she found herself watching him after that with a different quality of attention. Not the attention of attraction, not yet, but something more like recognition. She had seen plenty of quiet men. Douglas had been quiet in a particular way, a quiet that was the control of sound in order to control everything else. She had seen quiet men who were hiding cruelty, and quiet men who were hiding nothing because there was nothing there to find. Cornelius Alden was quiet in a different way entirely. His quiet had texture. It had a held quality, like a man carrying something with great care because the thing was precious, not because he wanted to keep it from you. She began to pay attention to the details. He always had a book with him, not just a newspaper. She caught the titles when he left them on the table. Marcus Aurelius 1 week, a surveying manual the next, a very worn copy of Thoreau that he seemed to be on his third reading of, judging by the state of the spine. He sometimes came in after a long day with red dust along his jaw and his hands clean but his nails still rimmed with earth. And he would sit and order his supper and study whatever was in front of him with such complete focus that the noise of the room seemed simply not to reach him. She started to look forward to 7 o'clock in the mornings, which she recognized after about 10 days as a problem. She was not in Colby Creek to look forward to anything except her own breathing room. She had come here to recover herself, not to hand pieces of herself to anyone new. Still, the morning in late April that everything shifted was a Monday, when the rains came hard and early and turned the street into a river of red mud, and 3 of the hotel's laundry lines snapped their ropes in the wind, sending sheets into the mud and over the fence. Mamie was chasing them with the grim efficiency of a woman who has made peace with futility when she heard boots on the wet ground behind her. And then 2 large, capable hands reached past her and caught the last sheet before it cleared the fence entirely. She turned. Cornelius Alden was standing in the rain without a hat on, holding a muddy sheet, looking approximately as surprised to be doing this as she was to see him doing it. "I was passing," he said. "Saw the lines go." "Thank you," she said, and then, because the rain was not slowing and the situation was objectively absurd, she laughed. A real laugh, not the polished social laugh she had maintained for years, but a full and helpless laugh at the image of them both standing in the rain holding muddy linen. He looked at her and something in his face shifted. Not a smile, not quite, but a softening around the eyes, a kind of quiet appreciation. "I could help restring the lines," he said. "If you have spare rope." "In the barn," she said. "Show me." They worked together in the rain for 40 minutes, him climbing and her handing up tools and rope and sections of new line while the sky did what it wanted. He worked with the methodical competence of a man who has spent years solving physical problems alone. No wasted movement, no commentary, just the steady application of attention and effort. She found herself matching his rhythm without intending to. When the lines were up, they stood on the porch and she handed him a towel from the interior, which he used with grave courtesy, and she poured 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen pot because Mrs. Foss was across the street at the dry goods store and would not be back for another half-hour. They sat on the porch chairs, both damp, both watching the rain come off the roof's edge in a silver curtain, and did not say anything for a full 2 minutes, and it was not uncomfortable. "You're new," he said at last. 3 weeks, she said. "From St. Louis." He was quiet for another moment, the coffee cup held in both hands. "Long way." "Yes," she said, running toward or away. He asked without any sharpness to it, with the same level quiet he applied to everything. She looked at him. He was looking at the rain. "Does it matter?" she asked. "Not particularly," he said. "Just helps a person understand the landscape." She thought about that. "Away," she said finally. "Though I find that Colby Creek is turning into something I might be running toward." He nodded in that complete way of his, and they drank their coffee, and the rain fell straight and steady, and the red street ran with water, and somewhere in the distance a horse made a sound, and Mamie Callahan breathed in the wet sage air, and thought that this strange and muddy morning was the first morning in a very long time that felt entirely real. He came to breakfast the next morning and every morning after, which was what he always did. But now he looked up when she brought the coffee. Just looked up. Just a moment of acknowledgement, eyes that were a particular shade of gray-green that she had not noticed before because she had not been close enough, and then back to his book. But it was a different kind of looking up than before. She began to talk to him, in the small ways that a woman talks to a regular guest. A comment about the weather, which was always dramatic in New Mexico territory, shifting from clear to violent and back in the space of an hour. A remark about the newspaper headline when she caught him reading it. Once when she noticed the Marcus Aurelius, she said, "He's very good on the subject of accepting what you cannot change," and Cornelius had looked up sharply, not as if she had surprised him by speaking, but as if she had surprised him by saying something worth hearing. "You've read him," he said. "My father had a library," she said. "I had ambitions of making use of it." "Did you?" "Every one I could before I ran out of access to it." He looked at her steadily. "Shame," he said, "for the books. Not for you." She was not sure why that precise distinction moved her as much as it did. She carried it around for days afterward. May came in warm and then very warm, and the mesas turned from red to gold in the afternoon light in a way that made Mamie get out her watercolors for the first time since arriving. She sat on her windowsill in the hour before supper and painted the light on the rock faces, the long shadows stretching purple toward the town, the impossible sky. She painted badly at first, her hand unsteady from disuse, her colors muddy and inaccurate, but she kept at it with the doggedness of a woman reclaiming something that belongs to her. And by the middle of the month, the paintings on her sill began to hold light the way the real things did. She did not know that Cornelius could see the window from the road until the afternoon he stopped his horse below and looked up. "Those are good," he said. He had to call it up because she was on the second floor. She looked down at him with the paintbrush still in her hand. "They're not, but I'm working on it." "The sky in that one is right," he said, nodding at the one she had propped against the frame. "You've got the color right for this hour." She looked at the painting and then at the actual sky and tried to see what he saw. "You know something about painting," she called down. "Nothing," he said, "but I know this sky." He rode on and she looked at her painting for a long time. The following week he left a book on the table after breakfast, placed deliberately where she would find it when she cleared the dishes. It was a collection of landscape paintings, printed reproductions of Western paintings by various artists, the kind of book that cost a good deal and had to be ordered from the East. There was no note. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight, understanding what it meant, which was something careful and offered and not presumptuous, something that said, "I see what you are doing," without saying, "Look at me seeing it." She kept the book on the shelf beside her Keats. She began to wait for him to finish his breakfast, not because there was any reason to, but because the conversation, such as it was, had become the clearest thing in her day. He was not a talker. He was, in fact, one of the least talkative people she had ever encountered, and this was nothing like Douglas's controlled silences. It was more like the silence of a man who had decided that words were worth something and spent them accordingly. When he said something, she listened. When she said something, he did the same. He told her about the horses one morning in June, when she asked directly because she was curious, and she had decided in Colby Creek to be a woman who asked direct questions. "Her horses," he said, wrapping his hands around his cup. "They're bred for short sprints, a quarter mile, hence the name, but what I care about is the temperament. A horse with a good mind is worth 10 horses with fast legs. The mind is what you can actually work with." "How do you know a good mind when you see one?" she asked. He considered this seriously, which she appreciated. He never dismissed a question. "The eyes," he said at last, "but also the ears. A horse with a good mind watches things. Stays interested. Doesn't spook at everything but doesn't go dull either. There's an alertness to them, like they're paying attention on purpose." She thought that was a very fine description of a quality she admired in people too, and she thought also that he had just, without meaning to, described himself. "I'd like to see them sometime," she said. "The horses." He looked at her for a long moment. "Sunday," he said, "if you have the afternoon." "I can arrange it," she said. Mrs. Foss, who was not as unobservant as her brisk manner suggested, raised one eyebrow when Mamie asked for Sunday afternoon. "Alden," she said, a statement and not a question. "He's offered to show me the ranch," Mamie said. "Has he?" Mrs. Foss said, and the corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile but was its immediate neighbor. "Take a hat. The sun at noon will cook you right out of your shoes." He came for her with 2 horses, one his own, a big roan gelding that moved with quiet authority, and one a gentle brown mare he had brought for Mamie, which told her he had thought about the arrangement in advance and that she appreciated. She had ridden growing up, not well but adequately, and she told him so, and he handed her the reins without fuss, which she also appreciated. Douglas would have explained everything about horses to her. Cornelius simply watched her mount, assessed that she was competent, and turned his horse east. They rode through the sage flats under the enormous sky of early June, and he pointed things out in his spare way. The particular mesa that caught the first light in the morning, the dry wash that ran fast after rain, the stand of cottonwoods that marked where the creek came up shallow before dropping underground again. He knew this land the way he seemed to know most things, deeply and quietly, as if knowing it was something he had done over time by simply paying attention. The ranch was modest and exactly right. A low adobe house with a covered porch and a well, a large barn, 3 corrals, and beyond the corrals the pasture where the horses moved in groups or alone across the dry grass. There were 12 of them, and even Mamie, who knew little about horses, could see they were extraordinary, the particular quality of their movement, the proportion of their forms, the way they oriented toward Cornelius when he came to the fence as if he were someone familiar and trustworthy. "They know you," she said. "They should," he said. "I've known most of them since they were foals." He led her into the pasture and showed her how to greet them, flat palm, soft voice, letting them come to her rather than going to them. A young bay came forward and breathed warmly against her cheek, and she laughed and put her hand against its neck and felt the muscle and heat of it, the extraordinary life of it. "What's this one's name?" she asked. "Doesn't have one yet," he said. "He's 6 months. I wait until I know the personality." "What do you see so far?" Cornelius was quiet for a moment, watching the colt. "Curious," he said. "Brave, wants to know things." "Then his name should be something that means that," she said. "What would you call a thing that wants to know?" he said, and he was looking at her now, not the horse, and there was something in his eyes that was new and careful and warm. "Keats was curious," she said. "He went toward everything with his eyes wide open." Cornelius was quiet for another moment, and then, "Keats," he said, as if trying the word in his mouth. "That'll do." They sat on the porch with lemonade she had brought in a jar, and the afternoon stretched golden and long across the flats, and the horses moved in the pasture, and she told him about St. Louis and the river and the brick streets and her father's library and the feeling of watercolors drying on paper, the way the pigment moved when the water was exactly right. She did not tell him about Douglas. Not yet. He told her about Colorado, about growing up on a ranch in the San Luis Valley, about his father who had been a difficult man and a good rancher, not always in that order, about learning to work horses alongside a ranch hand named Paco who had known more about the animals than anyone Cornelius had ever met before or since. He talked about his wife, Eleanor, in the way of a man who has made some peace with a loss but still holds it with great care. He said she had been cheerful and precise, and had made the ranch feel inhabited in a way he was still learning to do alone. Mamie listened to all of this with the full and total attention she gave to things that mattered, and she understood something sitting on that porch in the June afternoon. Cornelius Alden was quiet in a different way than anything she had known before. His quiet was not control. It was not absence. It was presence, a full and careful and completely stable presence that asked nothing of her and withheld nothing from her, that simply existed alongside her with the same steady quality he brought to his horses and his land. She could breathe around him. That was the word for it, the only one that was accurate. She could breathe. She rode back to Colby Creek in the warm, early evening with the sky going rose and gold above the mesa, and she thought about that all the way to the hotel, and the thought did not frighten her, which surprised her. There was a complication, because there is always a complication. His name was Wesley Prout, and he ran the larger of the two saloons in Colby Creek and had apparently decided, some time before Mamie's arrival, that Mrs. Foss's hotel was a useful piece of property that he ought to own. He had made several offers to Mrs. Foss. Each one declined, and he had taken the declining personally in the way of men who are not accustomed to the word no. Mamie's awareness of Wesley Prout began the second week of June when he came into the hotel dining room for supper and sat at the table nearest the kitchen door and watched her work with the patient attention of a man deciding something. He was florid-faced and broad, not a large man, but a man who took up more space than his size warranted, the kind of man who talked past you to the person behind you. He had red hair going gray at the temples and a watch chain that he consulted too frequently for the time-checking to be genuine. "New girl," he said to Mrs. Foss, loudly enough for Mamie to hear. "My seamstress and laundress," Mrs. Foss said, without warmth. "Pretty thing," he said, equally loudly. Mrs. Foss looked at him with the flat, dark stare she reserved for things that required moving out of her way. "Will you be having the beef or the chicken, Mr. Prout?" He ordered the beef. He left without a tip and with a long look at Mamie that she absorbed without expression and stored in the part of her mind where she kept things to be cautious about. He came back 3 times in the following 2 weeks. Each time he sat and watched her and made remarks to Mrs. Foss that were designed to be heard. Each time Mamie was professional and invisible in exactly the way she had promised, which she had learned in her marriage was the safest management of men like this. Not because she was afraid, she was less afraid than she had ever been in her life, but because she was strategic, and she understood that her position here depended on not creating conflict that Mrs. Foss would have to manage. But the 3rd time, Prout waited until Mrs. Foss was in the kitchen and caught Mamie's wrist as she passed. "Sit with me a moment," he said. "I have tables to see to," she said, keeping her voice level and her eyes steady. "They'll wait," he said. "I won't," she said, and removed his hand from her wrist with the same calm resolution she had brought to restringing the laundry lines and went to the kitchen. She told Mrs. Foss, because she was not going to manage this alone and she had learned at some cost the price of managing everything alone. Mrs. Foss set down her ladle with the deliberate care of a woman keeping herself in check. "I'll speak to him," she said. "He wants the hotel," Mamie said. "I think I'm just one of the ways he's trying to make you uncomfortable enough to sell." Mrs. Foss looked at her with the kind of respect that women of a certain age give to younger women who have understood something hard. "Yes," she said, "that is very likely true, and we will not give him the satisfaction of either." Mamie found out about the encounter 2 days later through the agency of Billy Marsh, who swept the saloon and the hotel porch with roughly equal enthusiasm and a comprehensive knowledge of everything that happened in both establishments. Billy was 15 and extremely informative and completely trustworthy in his loyalty, because Mamie had given him 2 of her old illustrated papers and taught him to read 3 weeks ago, which had apparently made her a permanent figure of devotion in his universe. "Prout's been saying things," Billy said, sweeping the porch with visible drama. "About the hotel lady and how she's not going to last, and some of the boys at the bar were laughing about it." "What kind of things?" Mamie asked. "How the hotel is going to be his by August and all the women in it can take the next stage out," Billy said, and then looked stricken. "Pardon me, ma'am, his words." "That's all right, Billy," she said. "I've heard worse, but thank you for telling me." She thought about it through that day and the next, and on Sunday when she rode out to Cornelius's ranch. It had become their Sunday pattern without anyone proposing it formally, which was very like both of them. She told him about it because she found she told him most things now. He listened with his usual complete attention, sitting on the porch steps with his coffee, and when she finished he was quiet for a moment. Prute's been a problem in this town for a while, he said. He's not dangerous in the way of a man with a gun. He's dangerous in the way of a man with money and patience. That's the worst kind, she said. It is, he agreed. I'm not leaving, she said, and she said it with a steadiness that she hoped communicated what it meant, which was that she had left one place already and she had chosen this one, and she was not being moved again. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said simply. I just wanted you to know that Prute doesn't change anything for me, she said. I wanted to say it out loud. All right, he said. I'll keep an ear to the ground. I know most of the ranchers in the valley and they're not particularly fond of Prute. If he starts putting real pressure on Mrs. Foss, there are things that can be done. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said quietly. I'd be doing it regardless. She looked at him in the June morning light, this quiet, careful man sitting on his porch steps with his coffee, and something in her chest moved like water moving under ice. On the 4th of July, Colby Creek made an occasion of itself. There were firecrackers from the dry goods store, and a barrel of lemonade outside the post office, and a speech by the town mayor that lasted considerably longer than the patience of his audience. In the evening there was dancing in the street outside the hotel, a fiddle player from one of the ranches and 2 men with guitars, and the red clay street was crowded with people in their good clothes, and the air smelled of gunpowder and sage, and the particular sweetness of summer evening. Mamie stood on the hotel porch and watched because she was not sure she was the kind of person who danced at things anymore, and then Cornelius materialized from somewhere at her side. He had a way of arriving without announcement, as if sound simply respected his intentions and said, "Do you dance?" "I used to," she said. "Do you want to again?" he asked. She looked at the street where 3 pairs were already moving to the fiddle ranch hands with their hats pushed back, a rancher and his wife who had clearly been dancing together for decades and moved with the comfortable precision of long practice, a young cowboy and a girl from the dry goods family who were trying very hard and managing very well. "I think I do," she said. He offered his hand. She took it. He was a careful dancer, not elegant, not accomplished, but completely attentive, which in dancing as in most things was worth more than style. He held her with the respectful steadiness she had come to associate with him, and they moved to the fiddle music in the warm July dark, and the stars came out above the mesa, and she could feel the warmth of his hand at her back and thought about how long it had been since touch felt like something welcome rather than something to be endured. When the song ended and the fiddle went into something faster, he stepped back and let her lead the choice, and she chose to stay beside him on the edge of the dancing rather than going inside, and they stood and watched the town be happy for a while. "You know," she said at last, "this is the first holiday in 3 years that I have enjoyed." He looked at her sideways. He did not ask why. He waited. She decided to tell him. The whole of it, the way she had been telling him pieces of things over weeks, but this was the whole. "I was married," she said. "I am still technically married, I suppose, until I manage a legal separation, which a woman in my position finds complicated. He was not cruel. He was a kind of erasure. He was very good at making me not exist. And I stayed because I didn't know that was what was happening until it had already happened so thoroughly that I couldn't find myself." Cornelius said nothing. He was very still. "I came here because I needed to find out if I was still there," she said. "If there was still a Mamie Callahan who wanted things and said things and made things." She paused. "There is. I have established that fairly conclusively." "Yes," he said, "there very much is." She looked at him. He was looking at the dancers, but there was a quality to his not looking at her that was very much a looking. "I wanted you to know," she said, "because I am aware that this, whatever this is between us, has been becoming something, and I thought you deserved to know the whole landscape, as you said." He turned to look at her then, directly and fully, with those gray-green eyes that she had been studying for months now and still found new things in. "I appreciate that," he said. And then, after a moment, "The past belongs to itself. I'm only interested in the present tense." She looked at the stars and breathed and felt the July night warm against her skin, and thought that she was going to need to kiss this man at some point, and that it was going to have to be managed with some care because Cornelius Alden was not a man you rushed, and she was not a woman in a rush. The situation with Wesley Pruitt came to a head in late July, and it came in a way Mamie had not anticipated, which was through the mail. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to Mrs. Hattie Foss, hotel proprietor, Colby Creek, New Mexico Territory, from the law offices of a Mr. Cecil Drummond in Santa Fe, and its contents, which Mrs. Foss read to Mamie in the kitchen with a face gone very still and then very angry, informed her that a lien had been placed against the hotel property on the basis of an outstanding debt that Pruitt claimed Mrs. Foss's deceased husband, the late Mr. Albert Foss, had owed him from 1878, amounting to $460 plus accrued interest, and that if this was not settled, legal proceedings would commence. "Is any of it true?" Mamie asked, watching Mrs. Foss's face. "Albert borrowed money from Pruitt in 1878, Mrs. Foss said, with the careful precision of a woman controlling a large feeling. $150 when we were building the addition. Albert paid back 120 of it before he died. I did not know about the remaining 30. So he's invented the rest," Mamie said. "He's inflated $30 to $460 with interest over 4 years, which he has no legal right to, and he's hired a lawyer in Santa Fe to make it look official." Mrs. Foss set the letter down on the table with great deliberateness. "He wants this hotel." "We need a lawyer," Mamie said. "The nearest honest one is in Las Cruces," Mrs. Foss said. 40 miles. "Then we write to him today," Mamie said. "And we write to the county land office, and we write to the territorial government in Santa Fe, and we document everything Albert paid back and when, and we make this as difficult and transparent as we possibly can, because men like Pruitt count on confusion and isolation." Mrs. Foss looked at her for a long moment. "You have thought about things like this before." "I grew up watching my father practice law," Mamie said. "I was not allowed to do anything with that education, but I absorbed it. I know what a fraudulent claim looks like. I know how to contest one." "Then let's begin," Mrs. Foss said. They spent that evening and the next morning writing letters, clear, detailed, documented letters that laid out the history of the debt and the repayment and the evident inflation of the claim. And Mamie also wrote to her father's former law partner in St. Louis, a man named Mr. Harrison, who had always been fond of her, asking for a professional opinion on the legal merit of a lien filed under these circumstances. She told Cornelius on Sunday, and he listened to all of it with his customary careful attention. "I know the ranchers in the valley can speak to Pruitt's reputation if it comes to a character question," he said. "And I know of 2 men who might have had similar experiences with him and were quiet about it because they thought they stood alone. If they came forward," she said. "Let me talk to them," he said. He was gone 2 days in the following week, riding to 2 ranches up the valley, and he came back with a signed statement from each man attesting to similar inflated claims by Pruitt that had been settled quietly to avoid legal costs, and Mamie added these to the growing packet she was building. Pruitt, meanwhile, had apparently heard that the hotel was not simply rolling over, because he stopped coming to the dining room entirely, and the watches on his case got a little more frequent, and his manner around town became slightly colder. The reply from Mr. Harrison in St. Louis arrived in 3 weeks and was gratifyingly clear. The claim as described had several procedural irregularities that would be difficult to sustain before a territorial court, and if Mrs. Foss wished to retain his colleague in Las Cruces, he would write to recommend her case, which he did. By mid-August, the attorney in Las Cruces had written to Mr. Drummond in Santa Fe on Mrs. Foss's behalf, and within 10 days Mr. Drummond had found reasons to withdraw from the case entirely, because attorneys in Santa Fe are not, as a rule, eager to pursue claims that are being publicly characterized as fraudulent by multiple affidavits and a recommendation letter from a St. Louis law firm. Pruitt did not give up entirely. He was not a man who gave up. But the shape of his campaign changed. He retreated to subtler pressures, reducing the trade he sent to the hotel from his saloon, speaking against it in certain company, which was the kind of thing that is difficult to prosecute but visible enough that the town could judge him by it. And the town, which had not particularly liked Pruitt to begin with, judged accordingly. Colby Creek was small enough that character was currency, and Pruitt was spending his. Mrs. Foss put the packet of documents in a locked box in her room and called it her insurance, and she poured 2 small glasses of excellent whiskey from her private supply, one for herself and one for Mamie, and said, "I have never had anyone fight for this hotel the way you did." And Mamie said, "It felt like fighting for something that mattered." And she meant the hotel, and she meant something else too. August in New Mexico Territory was extraordinary and brutal and deeply, exhaustingly beautiful. The monsoon rains came each afternoon in tremendous curtains, building fast from nothing to a sky-filling event, and the air before each storm had an electricity and a smell of wet stone that Mamie breathed as deeply as she could. She painted through this month with an intensity she had not felt since before her marriage, and the paintings on her windowsill multiplied until she was stacking them against the wall, storm skies and mesa light, and the horses in the pasture at Cornelius's ranch. He had asked to see them one Sunday, and she had spread them across the porch railing and the steps, and he had gone through them one at a time with the same focused attention he gave to everything, and the silence as he looked was the particular silence of genuine engagement. "This one," he said, stopping at a painting of the roan gelding, his horse, Brutus, standing in the afternoon light with the mesa behind him. He held it for a long time. "You can have it," she said. He looked up. "I would like to pay you for it. You left me a $20 book," she said. "We're even." He looked at the painting and then at her, and the quality of that look was something she filed in the category of things that were becoming hard to look directly at. They were so warm. She painted a series of the horses that month, the full herd across the pasture at different times of day, and these were the best things she had done. She could feel it. The way the work had moved from reclaiming a skill to actually doing something with it. A rancher from up the valley who stopped at the hotel saw the one she had propped in the window of the hotel's sitting room, a particularly fine one of the mesa at dusk, and asked Mrs. Foss about it, and Mrs. Foss told him it was Mamie's, and he came to find her and asked if she'd sell it. She sold it for $4, which was more money than she had ever made from her painting and considerably less than it was worth. But she held the $4 for a long time afterward and felt something shift in her comprehension of herself. She was still a seamstress and laundress. She was still earning $9 a month and living above the kitchen. But she was also a painter, apparently in the active professional sense, and this was a version of herself she had been told very gently and very persistently was not realistic, and she was burning with the furious quiet joy of proving that wrong. She told Cornelius about the sale on the next Sunday, and he smiled. Actually smiled, which was a different thing from the quiet warmth in his eyes she had become accustomed to. A real smile that changed the whole geography of his face, and she thought, not for the first time, that his smiles were valuable precisely because they were not frequent. "You should sell them," he said. "There are buyers in Santa Fe who deal in Western paintings. I know this because I looked into it after I saw what you were doing." She looked at him. "You looked into it. Wrote to the territorial capital office and asked," he said matter-of-factly. "They gave me 2 names if you wanted to write to them." She stared at him. He had gone back to looking at the horses, his expression perfectly calm. "Cornelius Alden," she said. "Mamie," he said, the same calm. "You are not what I expected to find in Colby Creek, New Mexico Territory." He looked at her then, and the smile was not quite gone, the edges of it remaining around his eyes. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you were what I expected either." The declaration, such as it was, happened on a Sunday in September, which was the most beautiful month in the territory, the light going amber and long, and the air finally breaking from the August heat into something cool and clear. The sky, that particular deep blue that she had spent all summer trying to capture, and was only now beginning to get right. They were walking the fence line of the south pasture, which he did every Sunday to check for breaks, and she walked beside him with her hands in the pockets of her work skirt, and the colt Keats came trotting alongside them on the other side of the fence because he had adopted this as his custom. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right," he said. She stopped walking. He stopped too, one hand on the fence post, and looked at her with the full and patient attention that she had come to understand was simply how he was, how he would always be. "What are we doing?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, not an evasive quiet, a thinking quiet. "I believe we are spending Sundays together because we want to," he said, "and talking because we find it worthwhile, and not talking because we find that worthwhile also." "And," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The colt put his head over the fence and nosed at Mamie's hair, and she moved him gently aside without looking away from Cornelius. "And I think about you," Cornelius said, "for the rest of the week." The directness of it, offered in his characteristically unadorned way, caught her breath. "I think about you too," she said. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with any performance, just took it in his large, warm hand the way you take something you've been very careful with and are now choosing to hold. "I would like to court you properly," he said, "if that's something you want. I'm aware of the circumstances, and I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. But I'd like to be honest about what I'm feeling." "Cornelius," she said, and his name in her mouth felt like the right word for the right thing. "I know," he said. "It's complicated." "It's not as complicated as you might think," she said. "I intend to pursue a legal separation. I have begun the paperwork through Mr. Harrison's colleague. It takes time, but it's proceeding." She paused. "And I am very clear about what I want. I did not used to be clear about that, but I am now." "What do you want?" he asked simply, looking at her steadily. "This," she said. "Sundays and coffee and horses, and you actually listening when I say things, and the feeling that I can breathe." She paused, and then, because she had committed to being honest, "I want to kiss you also, and I have wanted to for about 2 months, but I wanted to have this conversation first." Something in him relaxed. A quality of held tension she hadn't known was there until it eased, and he brought her hand up and pressed his mouth to her knuckles first, formal and warm, and then he stepped closer and kissed her, properly, the way a man kisses someone he has been thinking about and has been careful about, and is now, at last, choosing. She kissed him back with everything she had, which was more than she had known was still in her, and the September sky arched enormous and blue above them, and the colt watched with bright, curious eyes, and the sage smelled of autumn, and this, she thought, with something that was close to reverence, this is what it is supposed to feel like. The formal courtship, as Cornelius had called it, was conducted with the same steady and considered quality he brought to everything, and Mamie found that courtship, when conducted by someone who actually thought about what she needed, was a revelation. He brought her books. He brought her a new set of watercolor paints of a quality she had not been able to afford for herself, and did it as a matter of course, not a declaration. He taught her to recognize the individual horses by their personalities, which she had been asking him to do for weeks. She taught him a card game her father had taught her, which he learned in 2 rounds because he was the kind of man who learned things quickly and without drawing attention to it. He came to the hotel not just for breakfast now, but sometimes in the evenings, sitting on the porch with her after the supper service was done, talking or not talking in the warm September dark while the stars came out, and the coyotes made their nightly commentary from the mesa. Mrs. Foss took note and said nothing except that she was leaving the porch lamp on a little longer each evening, which was her way of providing them cover, and Mamie loved her for it. The legal separation came through in October. It had moved faster than she had expected, partly because Mr. Harrison's colleague was very efficient and partly because Douglas Callahan, apparently, had not waited long before pursuing his own course, and had filed papers in St. Louis in April, almost immediately after Mamie's departure, which suggested that the marriage had been ready to dissolve on both sides for quite some time. The legal document that made her a free woman arrived on a Tuesday in a brown envelope, and she opened it in her room and read it twice and then sat with it in her lap for a while and felt, very quietly, the last lock she had been carrying in her chest click open and fall away. She told Cornelius on Sunday. He was very still for a moment. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I am extraordinarily all right." "Good," he said, and then, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to understand that there is no pressure in it and no expectation, only honesty." "Ask," she said. He looked at the horses in the pasture, the whole herd in the October afternoon, Keats among them now coming into the distinctive quality of his young adulthood, and then he looked at her. "I would like you to marry me," he said. "Not immediately, not before you're ready, not before you've had enough time to be just Mamie Callahan by yourself for as long as you need. But I want you to know that is what I want, because I think you should know what direction I'm looking." She looked at him for a long time. He was patient. He was always patient. "When I first came here," she said slowly, "I thought I needed to be alone. I thought being with someone else, any someone else, would mean I hadn't actually escaped anything. And now," he said, "and now I understand that what I was escaping was not companionship," she said. "It was the kind of companionship that erases, and what you offer is the opposite of that. You are Cornelius Alden, the most present person I have ever known. You make me feel more like myself, not less." And that is, she stopped, because she could feel the full weight of what she was about to say, and she wanted to say it right. "That is the only thing I ever actually needed." He was looking at her with those gray-green eyes and the full and steady warmth she had been walking toward for 7 months. "So yes," she said. "Not immediately. Let me have my time. But yes." He nodded. His complete and considered nod that meant everything he felt it needed to mean. And then he took her hand again, which he had been doing for 2 months now and which still felt, every time, like something chosen. They told Mrs. Foss in November, over the kitchen table, with coffee and Mrs. Foss looked at Mamie for a long moment with something in her eyes that was pride and something that was loss and something that was, beneath both of those, very genuine happiness. "You'll leave the hotel," she said. "I'll be 6 miles out," Mamie said, "and I will still come to help with the heavy laundry weeks and anything you need." She paused. "And I want to be honest with you, Hattie. You gave me my first breath of real air. I'm not going to forget that." Mrs. Foss compressed her lips in the way she had when she was moved and refusing to show it entirely. "You are a good woman," she said, which from Mrs. Foss was the highest available currency. "Billy will take over my morning work," Mamie said. "He's old enough and I've been teaching him. He's better at it than you'd think." "He's been better at most things than I thought since you took him in hand," Mrs. Foss said. She raised her coffee cup. "To the future, then, both of yours." They married in January of 1883, on a clear, cold day when the sky was that particular winter blue that seems to compress the world into sharp and excellent focus. The ceremony was in the small community church at the end of Colby Creek's Main Street, performed by the traveling minister who came through once a month, attended by Mrs. Foss and Billy Marsh and 4 of the ranchers from the valley whom Cornelius had known for years and their wives, and a young woman named Resita who worked the dry goods store and had become Mamie's friend, and the rancher who had bought the Mesa painting who had apparently decided this, made him a personal acquaintance. Mamie wore her best dress, which was a deep blue wool she had sewn herself with some care over the previous 2 months, and she had put her hair up simply with the pearl-headed pins her mother had given her years ago, which she had taken with her in the carpet bag without thinking too much about it, as if some part of her had known she would need them for something that mattered. Cornelius wore the good dark coat that he apparently owned for occasions, and he had cut his hair, which she saw when he turned to watch her come down the aisle between the pews, and she thought, not for the first time, that he was quietly and completely handsome in the way of men who don't think about it. He took her hand at the altar and held it with the same warmth and certainty he had held it since September, and the minister said the words, and she said hers with a steadiness and a fullness that was entirely different from the last time she had stood in a church, and said these words, because this time she knew exactly what she was choosing and why. And it was not a leap into the unknown but a very deliberate step toward something she had been walking toward all year. He said his words looking directly at her, which she would remember for the rest of her life, the gray-green eyes and the complete attention, and the quiet that was not absence but presence, complete and reliable presence. "I do," he said, and the weight of it in his level voice felt like the most honest thing she had heard in years. The reception was in the hotel dining room, which Mrs. Foss had decorated with a frankly surprising amount of paper flowers and several good bottles of wine from her personal supply. And the fiddle player came back from summer, and there was dancing again in the dining room this time. And Billy Marsh ate 3 pieces of the wedding cake that Reseda had baked, and then looked guilty, and then ate a 4th. Mamie danced with her husband twice and then stood beside him at the edge of the room and looked at the friends who had come, the small and genuine gathering of people who wished them well, and felt something she recognized very clearly as happiness, a clean and unambiguous happiness that she had not known in so long she had forgotten the weight of it. "What are you thinking?" Cornelius said, low, close to her ear. "That I got here by running," she said, "and that seems worth something. That even running away from something, if you run far enough in the right direction, can take you somewhere worth being." He turned to look at her, and there was the rare and full smile again. "You made it here," he said. "That's what counts." She took his hand. The ranch house in January was cold in the early mornings and warm in the evenings with the fire, and there were 12 horses in the pasture, and one of them was Keats, who had grown into something exceptional. Cornelius had already had an offer on Keats from a rancher in Colorado, a very good offer, and he had turned it down without telling Mamie until she found the letter and asked him about it. "Why?" she said. "You named him," he said simply. "I wasn't going to sell him without talking to you about it." She looked at him. He was cleaning a bridle at the kitchen table, which was where he did most of his tack work in the winter, and he looked up at her with the directness he always had. "What would you have decided," she asked, "if I said sell?" "I'd have thought about it very seriously," he said. "And if I said keep him, I'd have kept him," he said. She sat down across the table from him. "He's a very good horse," she said, "and the offer was generous." "He is," Cornelius agreed. "But he was the first one I named," she said, "so I want to keep him." "Then we keep him," he said, and went back to the bridle. She sat at the table and spread her paints out because she had begun working at the kitchen table in the mornings when the light came through the east window in a particular way, and she painted Keats from memory and from the many hours of studying him from the fence, and the painting was, she knew even as she was doing it, very good. It was the best thing she had made. The colt young horse now, really, growing into his chest and his stride had a quality that was hard to name, and she named it in the painting, that forward-leaning alertness, the brightness of an animal paying attention to the world. She sent it to one of the names Cornelius had given her in Santa Fe. The reply came in 3 weeks. The gallery wanted 4 more of the horses. They named a price per painting that made Mamie read the letter 3 times to be sure. She brought the letter to Cornelius in the barn where he was working a young filly on a lead line, walking her in slow, careful circles, and he read it and looked up at her. "Is this what you want?" he said. "To do more of them?" "More than almost anything," she said. "Then it's a good day," he said, and went back to the filly. She stood in the barn door and watched him work the horse with the long patience she had come to love like a landscape, and thought that this was her life now, this actual real breathing life, and the wonder of it had not become ordinary. She did not think it would. Spring came to Colby Creek with the particular theatrical excess that New Mexico territory employed for the season, the desert going almost impossibly green after the winter rains, the wildflowers coming up in the sage flats in purples and yellows, and a particular red that drove her to her brushes every time she saw it. She painted from the porch and from the mesa overlook and from the fence beside the pasture and from the kitchen window, and the paintings went to Santa Fe and came back as money, and the gallery wrote to say they were selling well and could she continue. She could. She was continuing. Billy Marsh came out on Saturdays now on a borrowed horse to help with the lighter ranch work, which Cornelius had arranged because Billy needed the income, and because he seemed to understand that continuity of care toward people was not a burden but something like watering plants, a regular small attention that sustained things. Billy was 16 now and growing into competence with a speed that was satisfying to watch, and he took to the horses with an instinctive quality that made Cornelius observe one afternoon that Billy might have a future with horses if he wanted it. "What does that mean?" Mamie asked later. "Means I could teach him the work properly," Cornelius said. "In a year or two if he wants. There's enough here to warrant another set of hands, and better a known person than a stranger." "He'd love it," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm thinking about it." This was, she had learned, how he made decisions, slowly and thoroughly, examining all the angles before naming a thing, and she had learned not to rush him because the decisions that came out of that process were always sound. She wrote to her mother in April, the first letter she had written home since leaving St. Louis. It was not an easy letter to write, not because she was uncertain of what she'd done, but because she was uncertain of how her mother would receive what she'd become. She was a woman who had left her husband, run to the frontier, worked laundry and seams for income, and married a horse rancher in a small New Mexico town. By the standards of St. Louis, this was a series of disasters. She wrote it anyway, honestly and without apology, describing Colby Creek and the ranch and the horses and the paintings going to Santa Fe, and describing Cornelius in the careful and specific way she described most things that mattered to her. Her mother replied in 6 weeks, and the reply was shorter than Mamie expected and more generous than she had hoped. Her mother said that she had been worried for a long time, even before Mamie had left, though she had not known what to do with the worry. She said that the letter sounded like someone she recognized, which was more than she could say for the letters Mamie had written from St. Louis in the last 2 years of the marriage. She said she would like to visit sometime if it was not inconvenient, and she supposed the frontier could not be as alarming as the papers made it sound. Mamie read this letter to Cornelius and he listened to all of it and then said, "Tell her to come in the fall. The weather is best in September and October." Mamie looked at him. "Your mother is welcome here," he said. "This is your home. Anyone who matters to you matters here." She folded the letter very carefully and set it on the shelf beside her Keats and her grandmother's thimble. She was beginning to understand something about Cornelius Alden that she suspected he had never articulated about himself and might not, if asked, be able to. He was a man who built things quietly and for keeps. The ranch, which he had built from nothing over 4 years. The reputation in the valley, which he had earned by being honest and reliable and never claiming more than he meant. The relationship with each of his horses, built on exactly the right amount of patience and attention. And now this life he was building with her, not with declarations or grand gestures but with the steady accumulation of small exactnesses. The book left on the table, the inquiries made on her behalf, the porch lamp left on, the Santa Fe gallery names in his careful handwriting, the mother welcome in the fall. She was in love with him completely and had been for some time, and she told him so one evening in May, in the way she had come to tell him things, directly and without preamble. They were sitting on the porch after supper, the evening air warm and the sky doing the thing it did at dusk, turning the mesa colors she could not entirely reproduce no matter how she tried. He had her hand in his as he often did in the evenings, just holding it in a loose and steady way. "I want to say something," she said. "Say it," he said. "I am deeply and completely in love with you," she said. I wanted to name it out loud because I think precise language matters. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel the warmth of his hand. "I love you," he said. It was the first time he had used the exact words, and she felt them settle into her like something that had always belonged there. "I have been," he said, "for a considerable time." "Since when?" she asked. He appeared to think about this seriously. "Since you laughed in the rain," he said, "about the muddy sheets." She laughed now, at the kitchen table on the porch, at the image of the two of them in April rain holding ruined laundry. "That is an excellent origin story," she said. He squeezed her hand and they sat in the evening, and the sky turned dark and the stars came out, and somewhere in the pasture the horses moved quietly in the dark, and it was the most ordinary and the most extraordinary evening she had ever lived. The news came in July, which was the right time for news of that nature, in the fullness of summer when the world was growing things. She told him in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, where he was eating his breakfast at the table because he ate at home now that there was a home to eat in, and she set down his coffee and said, "I believe we're going to have a child." He looked up at her. "Dr. Emery confirmed it yesterday," she said. "February, he thinks." Cornelius was very still for a long moment. She watched his face with care, the way she always watched his face because he kept most of it close, and the parts that came through were the honest parts. He stood from the table and crossed the kitchen and took her face very gently in both hands and looked at her, and his eyes were full of something she had no word for, something that was beyond the vocabulary of the quiet, something immense and careful and overwhelming. "Are you all right?" he said. "I am better than all right," she said. He held her for a long time, which was not usual for him in morning hours, and she felt his hand steady and warm against her back and his chin resting on her hair, and the kitchen smelled of coffee and sage brush from the open window, and somewhere outside Keats made a sound in the pasture. "A child," he said quietly, into her hair, as if he was still measuring the word. "In February," she said, "so we have time." "Good," he said. "I have things to build." He meant this literally, she discovered, because by the following week he had begun framing an addition to the east side of the house, working in the evenings after the ranch work, and she brought him water and watched him work and felt the pleasure of watching a man who knew how to make things with his hands apply that knowledge to something for their child. Her mother came in September as arranged, arriving on the stage from Albuquerque with 2 large trunks and the expression of a woman who has committed to an adventure, and is not going to admit it is more adventure than anticipated. Mamie met her at the stage stop, and her mother stepped down and looked at her daughter in the September light of Colby Creek, New Mexico territory, and her expression shifted from controlled composure to something genuine. "You look well," her mother said. "And then you look like yourself." "I am," Mamie said. "Come and meet my husband." Cornelius greeted her mother with a formality and courtesy that she could see her mother appreciating, because her mother was a woman who valued courtesy. And then he showed her the ranch and the horses with the same quiet care he showed everything he loved. And Mamie's mother stood at the pasture fence and watched Keats come forward to breathe at her hand and said, "This one seems particularly taken with you." And Cornelius said, "Your daughter named him." And her mother looked at Mamie with an expression that said many things without saying any of them. In the evenings her mother and Mamie sat on the porch after dinner and talked in the way they had not talked in years, the way that requires space and enough safety to be honest. Her mother talked about worrying, about the marriage and the long 2 years of letters that said nothing. Mamie talked about the morning at the kitchen table with the tea and the window painted over from outside, and her mother was very quiet and then said, "I wish I had seen it." "I wasn't ready for anyone to see it," Mamie said. "That was part of how it worked." "Are you painting again?" her mother asked. "Every day I can," Mamie said. "I'm selling to a gallery in Santa Fe." Her mother looked at her steadily. "Your father would have been very pleased," she said. "About the painting," a pause, "and about all of it I think he would have liked your husband." Mamie looked at the dark mesa against the September stars. "He was a quiet man too," she said, "father, but the right kind." "Yes," her mother said, "the right kind." She stayed 3 weeks and left in early October with the 2 trunks and something easier in her face, the particular easing of a woman whose worry has resolved. And she promised to write and to consider coming again in the spring if the journey was not too taxing, which Mamie understood to mean she would be coming in the spring. October brought the Santa Fe gallery owner himself, a small, energetic man named Mr. Cresswell who had made the trip from Santa Fe specifically to see more of Mamie's work and to discuss the possibility of a proper exhibition the following spring. He arrived at the ranch in a hired wagon and looked at the paintings she had spread across every available surface and was gratifyingly silent for several minutes. "These are remarkable," he said. "The horse series is unlike anything I've seen from a Western painter, and I deal in Western paintings professionally." "She's been working in earnest since the spring," Cornelius said. He was standing at the door of the studio room that had been his tack room before she had colonized it with her paints. He had yielded the tack room without comment 3 months ago and moved the tack to the barn. "I see that," Mr. Cresswell said. "Mrs. Alden, I'd like to propose an exhibition in April. I can sell these. I can sell them well. There's an appetite in Santa Fe and in the East for Western landscape work done with genuine knowledge of the place." He looked at the Macedusk painting, the one she considered her best. "You know this place?" "I do," she said. "I came to it running, but I know it." He laughed a little. "That's often how we find the things we know best," he said. She agreed to the exhibition. Cornelius drove Mr. Cresswell back to the stage in the wagon, and when he returned, she was still in the studio room looking at the paintings spread around her. The horses and the mesas and the sky and the sage flats and one small painting of the hotel porch that she had done from memory, the green-lettered sign and the first morning, the day she had arrived and stood and looked at the sky for the first time. She heard him come in behind her. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I made something worth making," she said. "Like I didn't know I was going to, and I did anyway." He came and stood beside her, looking at the hotel porch painting. "Is that the day you arrived?" he said. "How did you know?" "The light is right for May morning," he said. "Early." She looked at the painting. He was right. The light was exactly May morning, which was when she had arrived, the pale, early light of a morning so new it was still deciding what it wanted to be. "I didn't know you'd be in Colby Creek," she said. "I didn't know anything would be here except a place I could be without disappearing, but you were here." She looked at him. "And everything else came from there." He took her hand, steady and warm the way he always took it. "The horses are going to need feeding," he said, because he was Cornelius Alden and he managed large feelings by finding the next necessary thing to do. "I know," she said, laughing. "Come help me," he said. They walked out into the October evening together, the air sharp and clear and the mesa going gold above the pasture. And the horses came forward in the dusk as they always did. The particular animals who had become part of the particular life they were building in this particular corner of New Mexico territory. And Mamie thought she could paint the whole of it for the rest of her days and never run out. The baby was born in the second week of February 1884, which was a cold, clear week, and it was a boy, which Cornelius received with the same quiet and complete attention he received all important things, and Mamie held him in the room with the east window where the morning light came in, and Cornelius sat beside her on the bed's edge with his hand against her back, warm and steady, and the child was loud and excellent and entirely himself. "Name," she said after a while, because she was looking at this boy and trying to know the personality. Cornelius looked at the child for a long time. "He came in making noise," he said, "not afraid of being heard." "No," she agreed. "Your father's name." He said. She looked at him. Her father's name had been James Edward Brennan, a man of books and law and the particular righteous stubbornness of men who believe in things precisely enough to argue for them. "James," she said. "James Alden," Cornelius said. He tried it like a word that needed to fit. "Yes," he said. "That's right." James Edward Alden, named for her father and unafraid of being heard, was a child who from his earliest weeks seemed to confirm the naming. He was alert and loud and interested in absolutely everything, the way the colt Keats had been before him, bright-eyed and forward-leaning into the world. Cornelius held him with the same careful competence he brought to the young horses, not tentative, not theatrical, just present and steady. And James seemed to understand from very early on that this was someone he could rely on, because he was quietest and most settled in his father's arms. Mamie watched this and painted it, a small watercolor of Cornelius sitting with the baby on the porch in the April light, his head bent down, the vast landscape behind them, and this was the painting that would hang in the ranch house for the rest of their lives and would outlast them both. Spring came, the way spring always came to New Mexico territory, with extravagance, and the exhibition in Santa Fe was in April as planned. And it was a success in the modest but genuine way that things are successful when they are real. Mr. Cresswell sold 11 of the 20 paintings in the first weekend and had interested buyers for 6 more by the end of the month, and wrote to Mamie with figures that made her sit down at the kitchen table and read the letter twice. She wrote back saying she was already working on the next series. Wesley Prout left Colby Creek in March of that year, which was not entirely a surprise to anyone. His saloon business had declined steadily through the previous year, partly because his reputation had continued to erode after the hotel affair, and partly because a new saloon had opened on the western end of the street with better whiskey and a proprietor who did not watch his customers with the particular calculation of a man pricing them for future use. He sold the saloon and took the stage north and was not much discussed after, because Colby Creek had other things to consider. Mrs. Foss expanded the hotel in the summer, adding 2 guest rooms and a proper dining room attached to the original, and hired a full-time cook, which allowed her to direct operations from a position of oversight she seemed to find more congenial than the daily kitchen work. She visited the ranch on Sundays sometimes, for supper, and she held James with the careful pleasure of a woman who has decided against grandchildren of her own but is happy to borrow. Billy Marsh, now 17 and growing into a reliable and skillful young man, began working with Cornelius formally at the ranch 3 days a week, and showed the aptitude with horses that Cornelius had suspected, a natural feel for the animals' temperaments, and a patience with the young ones that was remarkable in a boy who had not particularly been shown patience himself in his life. Cornelius paid him a proper wage and treated him with the steady respect he brought to all his working relationships. And this was, Mamie understood, not charity but something more lasting, the particular generosity of a man who knows what it means to be seen properly and can therefore offer it to someone else. In the summer of 1884, the territory was full of the ordinary drama of Western life. Cattle drives coming through and filling the hotel for a few days. A dispute over water rights 2 valleys over that involved lawyers from Santa Fe and considerable noise, but ultimately resolved without violence. A series of Apache raids further south that had everyone anxious for a month before the situation resolved. The newspapers from the East were full of President Arthur and the Pendleton Civil Service Act, and the beginning of railroads pushing further into the territory. And Mamie read these with the interest of a woman who has been places and knows what change looks like when it is coming. "The railroad will reach here eventually," she told Cornelius one evening with the newspaper on her knee and James asleep in his cradle nearby. "Probably," he said. He was at the table with his horse records, the careful ledgers he kept of each animal's lineage and health history. "What does that do to the ranch?" she said. "Better market access," he said. "Might change the breed demand, more people coming through." He was quiet for a moment. "Mostly good things." "Will it change it too much?" she asked. He looked up from his ledgers. "The land doesn't change," he said. "The mesa doesn't change. The horses don't change. People coming and going doesn't change the core of a thing if the core is solid." She thought about that. "The core is solid," she said. "Yes," he said, and went back to his ledgers, which was as close to a declaration as most of his declarations got, and she understood it perfectly. She became pregnant again in the fall, which surprised them both and delighted them both after the surprise. And this time she painted through the pregnancy with the ease of someone who has learned to work around the conditions of her own body, adjusting the hours and the position and the light but not stopping. She told Mrs. Foss over coffee in October, and Mrs. Foss said, "Good." with the emphasis of a woman who believes in fullness of life. She told her mother by letter, and her mother replied with a recipe for beef broth that she insisted was essential, and the news that she was planning to come in March. James was 1 year old and walking, or rather, attempting to run, which was his preferred relationship with locomotion. By the time the winter came in, and the ranch in the cold months had a quality she had not expected and loved. The particular closeness of the three of them in the warm rooms, the fire going, the horses in the barn visible from the kitchen window, the evenings long and quiet and full. Cornelius read in the evenings and she painted or read, and James conducted his own investigations of every accessible surface, and it was a life that was nothing like any version of life she had imagined for herself and was, precisely and completely, right. The second child came in April, which was the most beautiful month of the year in Colby Creek, the desert in full flower and the sky so clean it seemed recently made. It was another boy, which they received with the same complete welcome they would have given any configuration, and he was different from James from the first hour, quieter, more watchful, taking the world in with a stillness that made Mamie look at Cornelius across the cradle and say, "He's going to be like you." Cornelius looked at the child for a long time. The child looked back at him with eyes still finding their color. "Is that all right?" he said, and there was something in it that was not quite uncertainty but was its neighboring feeling. "Cornelius," she said, and he looked at her. "There is no one in the world I would rather our child be like." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then Thomas," he said. "Thomas was my grandfather's name. He was a man who watched things." "Thomas Alden," she said. "Yes," he said. "Thomas Henry Alden, a watcher from the beginning, a child who observed with great intensity and acted only when he had decided to, which made him in some ways more manageable than his brother and in others considerably more difficult to predict, because when Thomas had decided on something, the decision was thorough." The spring exhibition in Santa Fe for that second year sold every painting. Mr. Cresswell wrote with an enthusiasm that was by his standards extravagant, and mentioned interest from a gallery in Denver and another in Boston. Mamie wrote back with a careful and considered response, negotiated terms that Cornelius read through with his quiet thoroughness and pronounced fair, and began a new series. She wrote to the name in Denver. A letter came back from Boston. The painting of the hotel porch from the morning she had arrived, which had always been for her, and not for anyone else, she did not send. It stayed on the wall of the ranch house beside the painting of Cornelius with James as an infant, two markers of the geography of her life, where it had been and where it had come. Mrs. Foss visited for supper in early summer, and she sat on the porch with Thomas on her knee and James running around the yard with a kind of energy that should probably have alarmed someone and did not, because Cornelius was in the yard too, a quiet, steady anchor that James orbited naturally, and Mrs. Foss watched this for a long time and then said to Mamie, "That is a very good man." "He is the best man I know," Mamie said, meaning it exactly. "You deserved it," Mrs. Foss said. "After everything. You deserve to find it." Mamie looked at her husband in the yard, patient and steady and warm, and at her son bright-eyed and bold in his orbit, and felt the evening light of the territory on her face, the ancient red rock light that she had been trying to paint for 3 years and was only beginning to understand. "I'm not sure deserve is the right word," she said. "I think I just finally went looking for it. I stopped staying in a place that was killing me quietly and I went looking." "Same thing," Mrs. Foss said, and handed Thomas a biscuit, which he accepted with the grave courtesy of a child who has thought about it. Billy Marsh, 19 years old in the summer of 1885, turned out to be not just competent but gifted with the horses in a way that made Cornelius, one evening, talk about the future of the ranch with a seriousness he brought only to things he had been thinking about for a long time. "I'd like to expand," he said. "More breeding stock, a larger pasture on the east side. It's going to take more capital than I have immediately and more working hands." "Billy," she said. "Billy," he agreed. If he wants it, a partnership eventually when he's ready. He has the aptitude and the character. It's worth investing in. Have you talked to him? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. She looked at him. He looked back, waiting for her thoughts. It's the right thing, she said. And it's generous. It's practical, he said. Generous and practical are not mutually exclusive. No, she said. In your case, they're barely distinguishable. He turned back to his ledgers with the particular expression she had come to recognize as his way of receiving a compliment, which was to absorb it and move on, because he found drawing attention to himself in any direction uncomfortable. Billy Marsh, when asked, went very still in the way of a young man being handed something he had wanted so much he had been afraid to want it out loud. He said yes with the brevity of the completely sincere. Colby Creek grew through the mid-1880s, the way small frontier towns grew in the years when the railroad was coming, and the land was being settled with increasing density. New families arrived from Texas and Colorado and Kansas. A second school opened. A proper physician came to stay rather than passing through. The hotel expanded again, and Mrs. Foss, who was 63 and ran her expanding business with the same iron clarity she had always had, hired Reseda from the dry goods store as her hotel manager and pronounced herself satisfied with the succession. The ranch expanded as planned. The East pasture, new breeding stock, a partnership agreement drawn up in proper legal form by the Las Cruces attorney who had become Mrs. Foss's lawyer and then theirs, with Billy Marsh named as junior partner in the operation of the Alden Quarter Horse Ranch, which was what the painted sign on the gate said now in Mamie's own lettering, because Cornelius had asked her to do it, and she had lettered it with the same careful attention she brought to the paintings. James started school in the fall of 1886, which he approached with the running-at-things energy that was his fundamental style, and in which he thrived because the teacher, a young woman named Miss Archer who had come from Ohio with a degree from a proper normal school, was the kind of teacher who understood that some children learn by doing and moving and making noise. James was immediately the child in the front row who always had his hand up, sometimes before the question was finished. Thomas started 2 years later and sat in the back row and observed everything with those steady gray-green eyes that were entirely his father's, and produced work of such quiet and unexpected quality that Miss Archer wrote Mamie a letter about him in October of his first year, saying he was one of the most remarkable young students she had encountered in that or any school. The painting that went to Boston in the summer of 1886 hung in a gallery on Newbury Street and was reviewed in a journal that a copy of arrived at the ranch 2 months later by mail, the review calling it a work of stark and lyrical precision, the hand of a painter who knows the Western landscape not as a visitor but as an inhabitant, with all the intimacy that implies. Mamie read this review twice and then set it on the shelf beside her Keats. Her mother, who had been coming to Colby Creek every spring since 1884, brought the second review. She had apparently subscribed to the journal herself, and read it aloud over supper in a voice that made clear she was proud and did not know quite what to do with being proud of a daughter who had done something this far outside of what she had expected. "Your father," she said at the end. "I know," Mamie said. "He would have read this paragraph 6 times, her mother said. "I read it 6 times, Mamie said. Her mother reached across the supper table and took her hand, and the gesture was simple and complete, and said everything that needed saying about the distance they had traveled, both of them, from the kitchen table on the other side of the country, and the worry that had sat unspoken for years. Cornelius, listening to all of this from the end of the table with Thomas quiet beside him and James eating with the focused energy of a boy who fuels a great deal of locomotion, said nothing until the supper was done, and then said to Mamie's mother, "You should take one of the paintings when you go back this year, whichever one you want." Her mother looked at him with the expression she had been refining over 3 years of visits, the expression of a woman who has adjusted her understanding of what a son-in-law could be and continues to be pleasantly confirmed in the adjustment. "The spring mesa," her mother said, without hesitation. She had been looking at it since she arrived. "It's yours," he said. Mamie looked at her husband across the supper table, with her boys and her mother and the warm lamplight and the dark New Mexico Territory night beyond the windows, and thought of the woman who had pressed her forehead to a train window in St. Louis and watched the city dissolve with $23 in her shoe and no clear idea of where exactly she was going, only the knowledge of what she was leaving. She had run from a life that was killing her quietly, and she had run straight into a man who was quiet in a different way entirely, a way that made silence feel like rest instead of erasure, a way that made her feel more like herself the closer she stood to him. She had found in this red-rocked edge of the world the breathing room she had gone looking for, and then, unexpectedly and in the best possible way, she had found it was large enough to hold far more than just herself. She reached across the table and touched Cornelius's hand, and he turned it to hold hers with the steady warmth that had been constant from the first time he had reached for her in the September pasture, with the colt Keats watching and the sage going silver in the afternoon light. He looked at her. She looked at him. Everything was exactly as it should be, and it had been built carefully and kept honestly and would last, in the way that things built by people who understood what they were doing and why always lasted, long past the evening and the lamplight and the table, long past the territory and the mountains and even the red-rocked sky, into the days ahead that were already, even now, beginning to arrive. James knocked over his water glass and announced this as if it were a discovery worth cataloging, and Thomas looked at him with the measured expression of a child who is not surprised, and their grandmother rescued the tablecloth with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has been surprised by life and learned to manage the spills. And Cornelius stood to get the cloth from the kitchen and came back and set things right with the same quiet and capable attention he brought to everything in this life they had made together in the dust and light and immensity of New Mexico Territory, which was, by every measure that had ever mattered to Mamie Callahan, exactly the right place to have ended up.